Addressing the issues to do with the finance bill, we are looking at also the issue of Ebola, just to re-emphasize what has been said, and also the issue of schools and other issues that may arise. Now, to begin with, it's important to state that this week is very important because we're also going to have the budget highlights, in Parliament, and we'll also be looking at what are the areas that the government is focusing on. But also we tend to also look at the issue of the school strikes and what is happening. And you can see that there is a debate whether to have schools closed. There are others who are saying, let's do away with the boarding school. But honestly, as a nation, we have a challenge. And we have a challenge, and I think we need to address it. And maybe we as parents need to ask ourselves the question, are we parenting properly? What is lacking? You know, I was at a school yesterday, and they actually told me that the grade 10 learners are more bolder. They're even asking, can you give us an opportunity to communicate with our parents? I don't think we would have said that before. So there's an issue of discipline that we have to have an honest conversation about. You know, we have to have a conversation about. You know, the Bible says in the book of, Proverbs 13:24, spare the rod, spoil the child. And he who disciplines their child, because they love them. So we need to ask ourselves, have we dropped the ball? Have we let, the parenting role to go back to be done by teachers? We are so busy. Now, looking for bread, both fathers and mothers, I beg your pardon. So that's a conversation we need to have. That's a conversation we need to have. Why is it that is happening? We can't just sit back on our laurels. We have to speak about issues of morality. We have to speak about issues of homosexuality and lesbianism in schools. We have to have that difficult conversation as a nation. No matter what it is, we need to have that conversation. Issues of role modeling. What is the father's role? What is the mother's role? That is something we need to have. And we were able to see even some people, even from the opposition, saying that we need to have that dialogue. It's important that we do it, so that then we save the situation, as it were, because these are children, they are destroying their own lives, they are destroying property, so there must be something that must give, going forward. Blaming each other and calling each other names will not help, because that will not end the strikes, that will not end the banning, and we really, really condone with those that lost their lives, the 16 of them at Utumishi Fire Academy. I visited 7 who had been admitted at KNH, and we are glad to say that all of them have since been discharged, and going home. But 3 of them are going to be on a wheelchair. They are going to be on a wheelchair because they jumped from first floor to the ground, and now they had their limbs. They have to be taken care of. We thank God for all of the people that have come in to help, and also even for the parent who lost her life as they were going to pick their child. Government is very keen on such processes, and we'll be talking about this. But this is a conversation that we need to have, because today is this school and another. We need to address the issue of mob lynching. The issue of we saw a young man, Mutuku, be thrown off a bus and then being run over. Also, we had another incident, of 2 young people, university students, who were burnt alive just because they had a disagreement with a boda operator. Those are things that we need to have a conversation on. We seem to have a generation that really, I think we are losing our sense of humanity. This is a tough conversation that is devoid, that is bereft of our political persuasions and inclinations. We have to have a conversation about fake news, misinformation, disinformation. Like if you look at the finance bill, you realize that a lot of information that is out there is fake. There is nothing to do with the motor vehicle circulation tax. That's not true. There is no tax on bread. There is no tax on mitumba. And what happened is that we had the white bill. But the bill that people are supposed to focus on is the green bill, as published by the National Assembly. Because when a bill comes from the Treasury to the National Assembly, it's in white. Any bill that has not been published is in white anyway, even from a private member. drawing my experience from being a legislator for 2 houses of parliament. So the green one. But even then, some of those proposals that may have been there were dropped, and further to it, currently the National Assembly is going round to get views from Kenyans. So you present your views. We just had a very robust meeting this morning with the National Treasury and the National Parliament and my office to discuss about these issues. And that is why we are giving that door, so that if you have something that you need to present and you feel it is offending in the bill, then we need to look at it. However, we need to strike a balance between, because there are two sides to our development. How do we raise revenue to finance our development? We shall have the appropriations bill, what is popularly known as the budget, being read. But then how do you finance that very development? There must be a nexus, a balance. And I think ni vizuri tuseme hapa kabisa, like the way we used to say in the third administration, that kulipa ushuru ni kujitosheleza. You see, that is something that we need to inculcate, that we are the ones who can finance our own development. Nobody else can do it for us. Because if we don't do so, what we end up in is having a lot of debts, public debt, which is not sustainable, to be precise. So going forward, therefore, it is important to look at some of the positive things that are in the finance bill. For example, the finance bill is going to enhance certainty in the tax treatment of gratuity payments by clarifying eligibility. Here, if you are on contract, you should have a contract for 3 years, not less, and gratuity is not going to be taxed as long as your contract is 3 years. And in addition, it is up to 31%, because right now the regime has been a bit different. So it's important that that is very well emphasized. There is also a very clear simplification of the sale of scrap taxation framework for scrap metal, so that there is a 5% final withholding tax on whoever is buying this scrap metal, because right now that sector is unregulated. So it's just a way of ensuring that it's neat and tidy, and it will also help us to know where this scrap metal is coming from. There have been accusations of people who are destroying public infrastructure just to get steel because of the high demand in other jurisdictions. So it will actually help in promoting regulation of this sector through visibility, hence curb vandalism of public properties. That's very important, why that is being done. The other thing that also is critical in the finance bill is to avoid double taxation for trusts through the introduction of a one-stop approach taxation of income of trustees. So if you are creating a trust, and trusts are very good vehicles for wealth creation and even succession management. When you transfer your assets to a trust, then you will not be taxed double, because it's your trust anyways. We are trying to encourage as a government people to get into these ways of financing their own wealth, and to ensure that, because when you have trust, you are able to mobilize more capital, you are able to do huge projects. So that is why we are removing that double taxation, so that you are not charged or you are not taxed as an individual and then as a trust when you are actually a trustee. I think the issue of Mitumba has been overplayed. It is important to say categorically, as the government spokesman is speaking on behalf of government, the whole of government, that there is no such provision. There is no such provision. However, it is important to state clearly, a good number of the proposals that you can see here were actually from the sector people themselves. So that then people need to understand that before we make any tax exemption, any tax proposals, there are consultations. But there is no such for Mitumba. And also, there is elimination of restrictions on interest deduction for leasing and lending businesses. Now, let me explain this in terms of layman language. Currently, the law provides that you can either do lending or leasing, services. You have to do both, lending and leasing. I beg your pardon. You have to do both. But the new proposal is that you can either do lending or leasing. That means there will be more players in the market than it is now. Hiyo ni kusaidia mkulima mdogo, so that more people can have a bite at the cherry. So that is why lending and leasing, you don't have to do both. You can either do lending or leasing. And that is why the restriction has been exempted.